In the 18th century, something really spectacularly interesting happened in Scotland. Now, this might come as a surprise because most people don't think of Scotland as being a spectacularly interesting place. But in the 18th century, it was, because we have the dawn of the Scottish Enlightenment. I like to point out to American audiences that we have yet to have an American Enlightenment. We just have the Scots version. So that's what we're going to focus on. And it's spectacular. You have a small, dank country covered in hills, sheep and heather, and it produces philosophical and economic geniuses who have influence not just on their compatriots, but have influence on economics and philosophy even today. And one of the giants of the Scottish Enlightenment is Francis Hutcheson. Hutcheson was not himself Scots, he was Irish, but he moved to Scotland as soon as he possibly could, which is a hallmark of his obvious genius. Hutcheson was fantastic. Hutcheson is the Scottish Enlightenment equivalent of a blue touch paper on a firework. You light it and it starts burning, and then suddenly the whole thing just explodes. Because Hutcheson has a tremendous influence on many of his contemporaries. In particular, he has influence on Adam Smith and David Hume. Moreover, Hutcheson's views resonate today. We have many prominent bioethicists who have the ears of presidents, such as Leon Cass with George W. Bush, who offer a form of Hutchesonian moral sentimentalism as a justification for their views in bioethics. So Hutcheson, writing in the 18th century, resonates today and is still tremendously influential. So what's important about Hutcheson? The most important thing about Hutcheson is his sentimentalist approach to morality. Hutcheson recognized and accepted, as everybody in the 18th century and now does, that people have 5 senses: sight, hearing, taste, touch, and the like. But Hutcheson held that people have 3 further senses. They have a public sense, a sense of honour, and a moral sense. Now, Hutcheson believed that these are genuine senses, but he didn't think that there was anything spooky or mysterious about them. They're very straightforward in their operation. Let's give you an example. Hutcheson believes that persons have a public sense. You feel pleasure at other person's happiness, you feel pain at their lack of success or their misfortune. And this comes perfectly naturally and without any intermediate judgment. It is, after all, a sense. And notice how your other senses work. You smell rotten milk, which is a common experience in Scotland. You don't sit down and judge this milk is rotten and then have the scent. You just smell it and it hits you and you smell the rottenness of the milk. The public sense for Hutcheson works just like that. You see somebody experiencing misfortune, you feel sadness as a result of this. You see somebody experiencing good fortune and you feel happy as a result of this. This is something that people experience every day, not just with respect to real people, but also with respect to fictional characters. You see movies, the hero does badly, you feel unhappy. The hero does well, you feel very happy indeed, especially it seems if the hero happens to be a little furry dog. People like little furry dogs. But notice what the point is for Hutcheson. People have a genuine public sense. They also have a sense of honour. And by this, Hutcheson means something quite specific. You have a sense of honour when you receive appropriate gratitude for a good deed that you have done. It makes you feel happy. You don't sit down and think that gratitude was appropriate, rather you simply receive it and you feel happiness as a result. Again, like the unhappiness or the happiness that you experience from your public sense when you see the fortune or misfortunes of others, your sense of honour leads you to have certain affections. And so too does your sense operate in this way with respect to your moral sense. And here is where we move into the core of Hutcheson's moral philosophy. You persons have a moral sense, claims Hutcheson. You feel approval when you recognize that persons have performed good, virtuous actions. You feel disapproval naturally when you believe and sense that they haven't. Let's give you a very simple example. You're out for a meal with friends and somebody collects the money and then is supposed to pay your server. They do pay the server, but they leave a really bad tip. You might feel That's the wrong thing to do. You feel this almost visceral reaction to your friend's poor behaviour. You don't sit there and think, is this a rational, self-interested action or not? You simply think, that was not the right thing to do. Your moral sense is offended. Now, you might think, where does this moral sense come from? Why are we concerned about the interests of other people? For Hutcheson, the answer is straightforward. We have a calm, stable disposition towards universal benevolence. In this, Hutcheson is reacting against the psychological egoism of Thomas Hobbes, who held that persons were rationally self-interested and always acted in their own self-interest. Not at all, claims Hutcheson. People are instead generally benevolent. Moreover, for Hutcheson, Thomas Hobbes is not only wrong in ascribing rational self-interest to agents, he's also dangerous. Because if we think that we are just purely rationally self-interested and we fail to recognize our natural benevolence, we might not try to develop our benevolent affections. Indeed, we might even try to crush them. Now, one might say in response to Hutcheson, couldn't we just say that our benevolence works to our advantage? After all, we tend to like to associate with benevolent persons, so if you're a benevolent person, you're going to gain certain social advantages. Hutcheson's response is straightforward. Not so. Benevolence can't be reduced to self-interest, because benevolence, remember, is simply an affection. It's a moral sense. We don't mediate our senses through the will. Moreover, there might be certain acts of benevolence which actually cut against our obvious self-interest. For example, you might be a donor to the Institute for Humane Studies or to your alumni association. You could have used something else with that money which would give you more obvious and immediate gratification, but you don't, because you think it's important to support the causes that you believe are worthy or to support your alma mater's fund-driving effort. So you act benevolently even if you recognise this might not be strictly in your self-interest. For Hutcheson then, benevolence and self-interest are going to come apart. Hutcheson is incredibly influential. He develops a moral sentimentalist account of morality which influences David Hume and Adam Smith, two other giants of the Scottish Enlightenment. He's important for us today because he influences many of the debates which affect public policy, such as the views of Leon Cass, and finally, he's simply somebody who offers an account of human nature that we might like to take on board when we're considering how to arrange institutions. After all, if Hutcheson is right, and people are generally benevolent, we might want to arrange our institutions very differently than if we considered people to be, in a Hobbesian sense, rational, self-interested predators of one another. So if Hutcheson's view of this is correct, we're going to have a very different view of society than if Hobbes is correct. And now, let's turn to Adam Smith and David Hume and see where they take the Hutcheson fireworks.